Hi, this is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer for Community Culture Showcase. Well, it's certainly chilly outside. We are really in the midst of January, and it's cold, and as it's wintertime. So, wintertime, what better time than to go up and curl around a good book? So we're going to do some wonderful literary stuff today, talk about literature. I have a wonderful young author here, writes young adult books and is involved in writing another book. And as you know, my pen name is Anastasia Goodman, and under that pen name I write mysteries, my Sasha Perloff mystery series, and I have a new book in progress, so I want to read a little bit from that, and then we're just going to talk about some things that's been going on in and around town. So, welcome, Judy.
Hi, Harriet. Nice to be here.
And Judy and I know each other for several years. We are members of the Connecticut CAPA, the Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association.
Right.
So we've met and we've done a bunch of events together, and we've actually been involved in something I call the Literary Salon, and we've been having a couple of readings at the Malted Barley in downtown Westerly, Rhode Island, and kiddos and thank yous out to Colin Bennett, the owner of the establishment, for letting us come in. And you were there this month. And did a little reading for us. So tell us about yourself and tell us a little bit about your books and how you got involved in being a writer.
Well, I've been a graphic designer and web designer for quite a few years and an illustrator. And I always wanted to do an illustrated children's book. So I did one illustration, and then I thought, well, I really should start writing something. So I started writing, and about 130 some pages later, I realized it wasn't going to be a children's picture book, and it turned out to be better suited for preteens, teens, young adults. So that's how I got started in writing. I didn't sort of really start out to be a writer, but it just happened. So I'm enjoying it, and it's been a lot of fun, and I'm meeting a lot of fabulous people. And getting to be creative, so I'm loving it.
Yeah, it's great. So your books are about horses. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the book, and also tell us about your own experience in terms of writing about horses.
Okay. Well, this is my book, Slater Mountain: The Journey. It's a fun fictional adventure geared for readers about 9 and up, ages 9 and up, and it's the story of a girl, her horses, family, and friends. They live on the edge of the wilderness. They're sheep farmers. And Bailey, the main character, actually studies a group of wild horses that come through a section of the mountain on which they live. So as the story progresses, there's a bad storm, and her grandfather gets injured, and she has to step up and take a very dangerous journey to go get help for him. So it's a lot of fun, a lot of action, and I have 2 horses of my own.
Right.
And I've studied horses for years with a horse study group. And so what I've tried to do is take good horse handling principles and weave them into the story wherever it applies. It's still supposed to be just a fun fictional adventure. Mm-hmm. It's not by any means a how-to, but just makes it more realistic. And people have a little bit of informational takeaway. So that's the basic storyline, right. And it's just lots of fun. There's everything, ups and downs, fears and joys, fun and almost tragedy. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But it's just a lot of fun.
So how did you get involved with horses? Were you raised with riding horses when you were a kid?
Not really. I always... girls that lived on the road that I lived on had horses, and I always wanted a horse, but was never really able to have one. So it was one of those things that I just decided at one point in my life that if I was going to do it, I better do it, or I would never do it. Uh-huh. So that's when I got into horses, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been a journey. It's been a journey of learning and fun. I've met great people and fabulous horses, and there's always something new to learn. It's a journey that never ends.
Okay.
So
So they're big and they're a bit bulky, and you have to make sure they listen to you, otherwise you have a lot of trouble.
Yes, well, and horses, let's face it, dealing with horses, being around horses can be dangerous. It is dangerous because they're 1,000-pound animal and they have brains and emotions. They're not like a motorcycle, you know. They have brains and emotions, and they can do whatever they please. So you have to have good communication so that you can let them know what you want them to do. Most of the time, they would prefer to do what you want them to do.
Okay.
They're very easy to get along with. But like I said, they have emotions and they have a brain, and they are animals, so they can be scared, they can feel good and feisty and want to play. So you have to be careful, and you have to learn about them and how to work with them and be around them safely and how to communicate. That's the most important part, is the communication.
And unlike big dogs, they live a long time, so you have a long time commitment, at least as an owner.
The average horse can live anywhere from 20 to 40 years old. Yeah. I mean, the average is maybe late 20s, but they can live into their 30s and 40s.
Wow, yes, that's a big commitment.
Yeah, it is.
I had read in the paper a while ago about ponies, not like little horses that grow up, but actually ponies. And this is a woman who was blind, and she had a series of dogs, and the dogs only could be her companions for about 8 years because they were big, and they actually didn't, they lived to be about 12. And she wanted to get a miniature horse, I guess, as her seeing eye companion, because they lived to be about 30. They weren't hard to train, and they're about the size of a Newfoundland, I guess. So a Newfoundland weighs about 200 and something pounds. And of course, no one would allow her to bring the horse in the way you would a dog. But she said you could actually train it like you would a seeing eye dog.
Yeah, I've seen clips of therapy horses and service horses, miniature horses that they use now, and they are very agreeable to this type of work. And like you said, they live a lot longer, so it makes sense because the amount of training that has to go into an animal takes some years to get them ready to be a service animal. But yeah, there are a lot of horses now being used in therapeutic riding facilities to help people with disabilities of different kinds.
Right.
And they take them, a lot of miniature horses now, into nursing homes as therapy animals. They visit and help to brighten up the people's day, and they're very, just like therapy dogs.
Right,
They're
right.
They're great. Yeah.
Yes. So we just have to open up our parameters about what we want to think, so this woman is not wrong for wanting to have a seeing eye horse instead of a dog.
And there are more small horses being trained for that type of a job. Yeah, they're great. And they're very, I have, one of my horses is a miniature horse. He's actually too big for, he might be a mini pony cross. He's a little bigger than most miniatures, but he's about that size. And he's great. He's fun. He's very friendly. He's kind of an in-your-pocket kind of pony. So
are they social great. Like dogs are? Do they like to be around people or dogs or other animals?
They're just like dogs in some ways, that some of them like to be around people more than others, but they're generally, if they're trained with loving kindness and they're treated well, they like to be around people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Would you like to read us a little segment from your book?
Sure, I would love to. This is part of the journey that Bailey has to take to get help for her grandfather. As Bailey headed back down the mountain road, she couldn't help but think about her grandpa. She was worried because he was in pain and he looked so exhausted. She knew how important it was to get him help as soon as she could. Bailey turned Nugget onto the trail at Wilburn Creek. She knew trotting would be faster, but the trail was so rocky and uneven she didn't want to risk Nugget tripping, falling, or getting injured. They walked most of the time. Bailey would give him a little squeeze with her legs to ask him to trot for a bit whenever the trail evened out. At one point, she stopped to let Nugget drink from the creek. She was hungry, so she ate her sandwich. When she thought they'd gone a couple of miles, she started looking for the left trail turnoff. Suddenly, there was a loud crack, followed by a boom. Nugget jumped sideways and then spread all 4 feet and stuck low to the ground like a leopard would land after jumping out of a tree. All this happened in a split second before Bailey could even think about what the noise was. By now, Nugget was standing quiet and relaxed and turned almost all the way around, facing the direction they had come. Bailey turned the rest of the way to see the big tree limb that broke and landed on the ground right behind them. Now the limb was almost in front of them. "Whew, that was close," she exclaimed, very happy that the limb missed them completely. "It's a good thing we practiced our one-rein stops. Even though you didn't run far, we didn't have to use it," she told Nugget. Bailey had an aha moment, realizing there was a reason for all the things her mom and grandpa taught her about horses. And about life, she spoke the last part out loud and then laughed because she thought she was thinking to herself. Now she knew all the practice helped Nugget to know he could calm himself quickly without having to run very far when he got scared. The practice also helped her know what to do in case Nugget had bolted down the trail. They continued on. A little further down the trail, Three Does kicked up and crossed the trail fairly close in front of them. Nugget's head came up quickly, and he spooked in place. Bailey heard and saw the deer moving across the trail, but she stayed calm and watched them across the creek and disappear into the woods. The deer startled Nugget a little. He was alert as he watched them. Luckily, being raised in the wild, he was used to seeing deer. When Nugget was relaxed, his head lowered again, and Bailey rubbed his neck. "Good boy," she said softly. Bailey saw a curve up ahead. As they came around the curve, she saw a huge tree down, blocking the trail. It must have blown down during the storm. On the left side was a rock ledge going almost straight up and began quite a distance back and continued on. On the right side were brambles and a dense thicket. Bailey couldn't see any way around the down tree, and it was pretty high. Nugget wouldn't be able to step over it. Bailey slowly approached the tree trunk, and she and Nugget looked over it. The top of the trunk came up to his chest. "What do you think, boy? Do you think we can jump it?" Bailey asked, rubbing his neck gently. She had never jumped anything this high before while riding Nugget. "I know we've gone over ground poles and low cavaletti jumps, but nothing this big," Bailey let out a sigh. She sighed again and said, "It looks like we're going to have to jump it, boy." Bailey walked Nugget up to the tree again and let him investigate it. He sniffed it, pawed the ground in front of it, and looked over it. Nugget's ears were flicking back and forth. He was looking forward, alert and checking things out. Then his ears turned backward as he was paying attention to Bailey. Bailey checked out the trail on the other side. It looked clear. Nugget's ears turned back on her again. He was asking Bailey, "What do you want me to do?" She backed him up and walked up to the tree again. This time she urged him even closer so his chest and legs touched the tree. He tried to put a hoof up and pawed higher on the trunk. Then Nugget put his head over and looked at the ground on the other side. As they were investigating, Bailey let him know that he was doing exactly what she wanted him to do. "Good boy," she said calmly as she rubbed his neck. She wanted him to know everything about this tree, how tall and wide it was, and that the ground was safe where he would have to take off and land. This time she backed him up further and trotted to the tree. Slowly before arriving at the trunk, she stopped and let him check it out some more. Bailey backed him up quite a distance this time and took off at a lope, slowing before they reached the tree. Again, she let Nugget check out the tree. "Well, I guess this is it, buddy," she sighed and took a deep breath, both scared and excited all at the same time. Bailey cued Nugget, and they took off at a lope. As they approached the tree, she took the jumping position and cued him strongly a couple of times. She looked up and over and far beyond the trunk, saying, "Yes, Nugget, we're going over." Bailey felt his body spring and rise beneath her. She held the reins loosely and had her hands holding his mane so she wouldn't pull on his mouth. They flew through the air together and landed safely on the far side of the tree. She continued to lope Nugget for a few strides, then adjusted her seat to slow him to a trot, then a walk. Bailey softly rubbed his neck. "Good boy, Nugget," she said. "Let's go get help for Grandpa."
Very good. So you use some good practices in there,
Yep.
telling our readers about what's a good thing to do with the horses. And of course, there's a little surprise about the job. Are all horses capable of kind of jumping like that?
Sure.
Oh.
Horses will jump in nature. I mean, out in a pasture. If they come across something, if they can't get around it, they might jump it. The trick is that naturally they're balanced. But when you put a rider on a horse's back and the saddle and tack, you're adding a lot of weight and balance issues of the rider to the horse. So that affects their ability to be able to jump safely and how high.
Right.
So that's why it's so important to train and have good communication, because you have to make adjustments for those changes in balance, especially when you're jumping.
And how high? I mean, you watch the Olympics and you see people on horses going quite high,
Unbelievably high.
Yes. So one would assume that tree trunk was shorter than those poles are.
And different horses their abilities to jump and how high are going to vary according to their breed and their build.
Okay.
Their size and the length of their legs. So
Are there certain breeds that are well known for being jumpers versus quarter horses and thoroughbreds who are just bred to run like hell?
Well, quarter horses are bred more for ranch work. Race horses, thoroughbreds, are bred to race. And then there are horses that are bred to jump. They're called hunter jumpers, certain breeds. And some thoroughbreds actually make good hunter jumper horses, but then there are breeds like the Hanoverians and different breeds that are just built for jumping. They're very long-legged. And,
I see.
And specifically, just like there are horses that are built to pull, like draft horses, like Clydesdales and Percherons and Belgians they're bred to pull wagons and carts and different things. So
you have to be kind of like a horse person, like someone's a dog person, know different breeds, just like I think dogs actually have the most breeds of any general species that we know, but horses also have, a couple of dozen different kinds of breeds.
Right, and a horse that's bred to do certain things obviously is going to be able to do them probably better than other horses, but it doesn't mean that any horse can't jump or pull a wagon or whatever.
Right, don't have to be that specialized. Yes. I have a great little I'm not someone who knows horses. I've ridden horses now and then, just to do it rather than anything else. But I have a couple of good horse stories. So one was that I was in California in the I guess the Sierras is the big mountain range there. And my cousin, I was visiting her, and she said, "You want to hike up the mountain?" I thought, "Oh my God, no!" And so she said, "All right, we'll do it on horseback." And that was probably the first time in decades that I'd actually been on a horse for a long period of time. And really, it was the horse taking me up this mountain, and it was actually a lot of fun. I didn't know too much. I had to constantly have others show me what to do, but I guess a horse in that situation follows the lead of the other horses, so they don't have to be thinking too much in that sense. They just sort of follow the leader, and I was not on the leader. And I think, it's like being in a truck, if you can have a car analogy, because you're high up and you get a very different sense of nature and reality when you are a few feet off the ground. It actually kind of sort of changes your perspective almost.
It does. And you're right about horses wanting to follow, and there are herd animals, and So they do like to follow, and they feel comfortable if they feel there's a lead animal or a lead person who is competent in leading them, then that helps them relax, and if they know their job, they're happy to do their job.
Yes, yeah, no, that was very good. My other wonderful story is that, like this girl and her horse going to save someone, I lived in Colorado. We had a blizzard, and I stupidly said, all right, I got to get out. It was Thanksgiving weekend. I was going to go get a turkey or something. So I got in my car, and I got stuck in a snowbank. And I literally could not get the car out of the snowbank. So I got out of the car, and I started, and I'm really in deep snow, and I'm walking, and some woman, I didn't really know her, but one of my neighbors, we could have horses, came by on a horse, and she gave me a ride. And days on horseback, and days later, we had a tow truck come and get the car out of the snowbank. But there we go. There we were back in 19th century transportation mode, and it was a very funny experience. And I was all wet and everything, but it really did save me a lot of time. So they actually can get around in some pretty crappy weather that certainly the car didn't want to go, and even,
they're a great all-terrain vehicle.
I'm sure that's why they use them like mules. I guess they use to go down like things like the Grand Canyon, to go down that steep path.
Yeah, mules are exceptionally sure-footed. So
a little short, but not too good, I guess, as jumpers. But they
although they can jump, and I've even seen clips of people doing dressage, which is very precise, on mules.
Really?
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So I guess it's just good training, right?
Right.
That's great. No, that's really wonderful. Is it hard to? You live in a place. I've been to your home, so you live in a place where horses are obviously allowed.
Right.
And so, do you need a certain amount of acreage or whatever to properly keep a horse?
Well, you do, and every town has stipulations as to how many acres you need to keep livestock. But it's good to have at least an acre per horse, as far as grazing or room. They're a big animal, so they need some room to move around in just in their, every day. Each town, you have to go by what your town allows and stipulates for.
Now, we've had some bitterly cold weather, below zero. Do you have to be fearful that the horse will be freeze to death or anything like that?
I keep a close eye on them. They're well made to withstand cold temperatures. Horses in the wild do well. They grow a thick fur in the wintertime, and they actually can raise and lower their hair according to how they need it to keep themselves warm. The only thing they can't do is they can't get out, they need a place to get out of the wind, because there's nothing they can do about that. So having a shelter for them is really important. And then the other factor in them being able to withstand cold temperatures is the amount of food that they have. That's how they actually keep warm, is by eating hay or grass in the wild. And so they need plenty of hay to keep warm, because that's it's like their combustion engine, and they burn that hay to keep warm.
Wow.
That produces their body energy and keeps their temperature regulated. So they need extra hay in the wintertime if they're not out in the wild. And so I do that. I've just been throwing hay at them. Like, if they have too much and it gets wasted, that's less of a problem than if they were to be too cold, because
Do you keep your horses in a barn?
Mine, I keep in what I call an in-out situation. They have a barn and stalls, but the doors are left open. They have large paddock areas, and they can go in and out however they want. So they can get out of the sun, out of the heat, out away from insects or out of the wind, and they can be out in the sun when they want to be. They can, it gives them some freedom, and that way they can control their situation and their temperature better. So.
I've seen on TV, I don't know enough personally, but sometimes you see horses and they have like a goat or a chicken or a cat in the barn area to keep them company. Do you have? Yeah, I'm sure you've seen things like that.
Yes, I have, and I actually used to have a goat. She lived her life and is gone now, but she was a good companion. Horses, like other animals, they get along with other animals, and they learn to honor each other's space, however that works out. Just like dogs or other animals, they'll let another animal know if they don't want them to come in their space or whatever. But they get along with cats, or I had chickens for a while. The chickens would be in the stall with the horses or in the paddock. So they get along with almost any animal.
That's really interesting. And did you experiment, or you just had the goat, or you had the chickens, and
well,
you figured, what the heck?
Goat actually, I think she thought she was a horse.
Oh, okay.
And she would just stay right with my horse all the time. That was before I had the miniature horse as a companion. And she just stayed with him all the time. She would really get upset when I trailered Classy, that's my horse's name, when I would trailer him somewhere to go ride with friends. She would actually get upset when he left. So I think she thought she was a horse.
That's great. That's great. Well, it takes like to own any pet. It takes a huge commitment. I mean, if you own a dog, you usually have to take them out and walk them a couple of times. Do horses also need to be exercised like that?
They do need to be exercised. That's why I was saying they need a large area to be able to move around in. That's good for them. But then they do need to be able to run or be able to move. So that's why it's nice if you have pasture that they can be out and run in. But it's good for them to be exercised regularly.
So to get on them and actually ride them.
Or you can exercise horses on the ground as well.
Oh, okay.
On what they call a lead line or a lunge line. You can exercise them, or they can be ridden and exercised.
Oh, okay.
Either way. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So you obviously know a lot about horses, and so you've filled your book with all kinds of stories to make people love your characters and love horses, so that they, lots of kids always want to own a horse, even though obviously they can't if they live in smaller quarters.
Right, or in the city or something. They might not be able to have a horse. Although people can own horses and have horses and not have them on their own property, they go to a boarding facility and they board their horse.
Sure.
There they pay to have someone take care of it, and then they go there and ride or train or play with their horses or whatever, groom them.
Sure.
So there is that possibility that, kids and people can have horses, and even if they can't keep them on their own property.
Right, exactly. So you and I have gone to a bunch of author events together, but you have a special niche. So do you want to tell us about this special author appearance you're going to make?
Sure. I'm going to be at the Rhode Island Federation of Riding Clubs puts on a fundraiser for their organization every year. And it's called the Horseman's Bazaar and Indoor Yard Sale. And it's at, this year it will be at Metcalf School in Exeter, Rhode Island. And it's going to be March 25th from 9 to 2. It's a free event. You don't have to pay to get in. And it's kind of a tax sale, all-purpose sale. There's food being served there, and all types of vendors, everything from candy makers to who knows what. But I will be there with my book.
Yes, autographing books, yes.
Autographing books and talking with people. It's a fun time because it's mostly horse people, although the general public comes because it's an indoor yard sale as well.
Right.
So there's sort of something for everyone.
At a public school, so it's easy, right? Easy to get to, big parking, no problem. It could be snowing out, it's fine, although we hope not in March.
It's indoors, so it's wonderful. Yeah, it's a wonderful event and lots of fun. And the money goes for a good cause. to help support the riding clubs of Rhode Island, the Rhode Island Federation of Riding Clubs.
Oh, very nice, very nice.
Yeah.
So my goal as the host and producer is to promote art and culture, and of course that means literature. And so I've had this idea for a couple of years. June 16th, around the English-speaking world, is what they call Bloomsbury Day, which celebrates James Joyce's masterpiece, Ulysses, which has its main character, a guy named Leo Bloom, which takes place in a 24-hour period, his wanderings through the streets of Dublin. And he wanders around all kinds of strange people, and for many years he was an Irish writer, of course, and it was banned in Dublin because of sex and all kinds of other things that go on. But it is a great masterpiece. And they have this thing going on around the world, and I've been trying, and maybe this year will be successful, is to take my literary salon idea and literally make it a Bloomsbury idea and have people read, which is the idea, is to read James Joyce's novel from Ulysses from beginning to end, which is a master big book. So I'm not thinking we're going to do that, but I'm thinking we could actually have people read a little bit of Joyce and then to promote our local artists. So
Sounds like a great idea.
Yes, yes. So I'm looking for to do it in downtown Westerly because it's got a number of venues that we can probably use, and I'll be going out looking for restaurants and maybe the Y, maybe the library to join in, maybe even Town Hall to join in this celebration. This year it happens to be on a Saturday, so we could start early in the day and then go to not too late at night, but if you want to drink and party in downtown Westerly, there's plenty of places to do it in, so maybe they'll allow us to do that. So that's a continuation of my literary salon idea. That's what I would like to promote. So if my viewers are out there and you know some venue, I'm thinking of Westerly, Rhode Island, but if you've got a better idea, by all means, contact me at GraysonHarriet@gmail.com and tell me about a great location you think where we could have 3, 4, 5, 6 places that we can have people read Joyce's novel and then have local readers, local authors reading from their own masterpieces. So I'm very keen on starting this up. So it's June. We're in January. We have a number of months to plan for this. And as always, as Judy and I both know as local writers, that you always have to find places that are willing to let us have an opportunity to even have a seat somewhere so we can have some exposure to the public and they could see. And we have a lot of great writers right here in our local community. I mean, just like I've had painters on these shows before. We have a wonderful, rich, beautiful kind of artistic community, and we want to promote it, and that's the way we want to have events like this so people get to know us.
Right, exactly.
So now you have something new that you have coming up.
Well, first of all, yes, I do. But first of all, I wanted to mention that I am working on a sequel to Slater Mountain, The Journey. It's titled Slater Mountain, The Legend, and it's the same characters, and some of the characters are horses in these books. And there'll be some new characters, and will be titled Slater Mountain, The Legend. And I'm working on that now, so it will be a series. But then I'm also working on a book of short stories that some of them may have maybe about horses and some not. Mm-hmm. So I would love to read a selection from that, if that's okay, Harriet?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. This is a short story. Working title is Euphoria. Artists, whether visual artists, musicians, writers, actors, or other creative types, tend to be much more aware of the in-between times. True, I can't speak for all artists, but I'm definitely speaking for myself. By in-between times, I'm referring to times such as during the summer when you've been at the beach, you come home and you're showering off the sand, listening to the sounds of dinner being prepared from other cottages, and people walking up from the beach past the window talking about plans for dinner or the evening. The sun is no longer bright in the sky, but it's not sunset and it's not dark yet. It's not afternoon, it's not dinner time, it's not evening. It's an in-between time. Or the time when you're riding your horse in between when everything is going smoothly and when he's running away with you. That moment when you could have done something to help him not be afraid, but you didn't. So now you have way bigger problems to deal with. Similarly, the time between life and death is an in-between time, just as the time between every moment is an in-between time. Some years ago, my husband and I used to frequent a pub near where we lived. One evening, we walked in and up to the bar. We eyed 2 empty bar stools where we planned to sit between a man with bright red hair and another man. The man's red hair was sticking straight up as if he'd taken off his hat and raked and rubbed his fingers through it. I was going to sit directly next to the redhead. The human body is not made to handle alcohol. In fact, it's actually poison to the human system. When we drink alcoholic beverages, the brain immediately notices and says, "This is poison. I'm going to die." The brain says, "I need to quickly try to rid the body of this poison and prepare to go from a physical body to a non-physical spiritual state." So the brain takes steps to soften our perception of this reality, to ease our transition to a spiritual state, while it works furiously to rid the body of the poison. As a result, during this time, our eyes get glassed over, our face gets flushed, our speech slurs, our reaction time slows, our balance is impaired, but best of all, we gain an incredibly euphoric view of the world. We don't seem to mind all these changes. In fact, we rather enjoy them and find them quite humorous. As I started to sit down on the bar stool, the redhead said, "Hi, I'm Red." I looked at him and smiled with my usual wide grin. Red looked at me and blurted out, "You look just like John Denver." I noticed that Red was in that enjoyable in-between time caused by alcoholic consumption. I was also thinking I had similar length blonde hair, glasses, and a wide smile. I could definitely see the resemblance to John Denver, a popular singer of the 1970s. So I hadn't had a chance to respond yet. Probably because of my silence, all of a sudden it hit Red that I was of the feminine persuasion, and he clumsily blurted out, "Oh, I hope I didn't offend you." "Not at all," I responded. "I like John Denver." We all broke out laughing, including my husband, and shared several brews together that evening. Red and I became fast friends. I learned that he was a fireman, learned about his family and his life. Whenever Bob and I came in, Red would look at me and call out, "Hi, John," and I would smile and answer, "Hey, Red, how are you doing?" We would laugh, and other folks would look at us kind of sideways like we were nuts. But we knew exactly what we were talking about, and we were glad to see each other. Bob and I both enjoyed Red's company. After all, we had spent time together in that blissful in-between time between life and death. So if you ever see me in a pub, just call out, "Hey, John." I'll wave back and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" Maybe we can even spend time together in that euphoric in-between time.
Very nice. So this is like an essay rather than fiction?
Yeah, this is nonfiction. That actually happened.
Yes, yes. So are you thinking of creating like a book of essays? Is that
it's going to be a book based on true stories.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. My own true stories.
And you're conceiving this as actually being a book format?
Yes. Yes. But a book of short stories.
Okay. All right.
You know, sort of anecdotes and life experiences, maybe some horse stories thrown in for good measure.
And what inspired you to write this? I mean, you is this from last year or 10 years ago?
Several years ago.
Okay.
Quite a few years ago. But just thinking, it's funny, but one of the advantages, people don't think of it as an advantage, but I've learned to love it, is in having horses, is when you have to do cleanup, you're basically doing manure cleanup. Well, everyone thinks, oh, yuck, manure cleanup. But it's actually I've found it a wonderful time, because you're doing this thing that you don't have to think about, shoveling manure. But it allows your brain to really kind of just spin and turn and think about all kinds of things. So a lot of ideas come to me during this.
While you're shoveling
yes,
manure.
while I'm doing manure cleanup. So that was one of the ideas that came to me, was to do a book of short sort of anecdotes of true life happenings that have happened to me, and put it all together in a book. Just that it's a good way to process my life and share my joy and insights with other people. So.
I can see that, because when I do certain kinds of repetitive things, like some kinds of exercise where you basically don't think, or you don't have to really think, is when I start thinking about other kinds of things.
Yeah, it's a great time to use to brainstorm.
Exactly.
Literally.
And then when I like to ride a bicycle the same way I ride on a track. It's the same track, and so I don't really need to think about the path I'm taking, except for maybe running into other people, which I don't ever do. So again, another way of letting your brain go on full speed, thinking about something completely different than some kind of mundane task. No, I absolutely agree. I agree.
As Mark Twain put it when he was asked where he got his ideas, he called it the 3 Bs. He called it bed, bath, and bus. And so I've added another, which is bed, bath, bus, and barn.
Oh, yes, that's very clever.
So I call it the 4 Bs.
Oh, okay. So I know very little about horses, but I have actually a new book coming out. It's called The Terrorist War, and it's a little hard to see because it's a little glossy, but you can see that this is my latest in my Anastasia Goodman series, and it takes place in New York City, 2004, when President Bush comes in to be renominated for the Republican nomination for president. And there, if people remember, the Iraq War has just been exploding, and there's lots and lots of demonstrations. And I know from experience, having been at, not necessarily in 2004, but demonstrations, police often use horses as a way of looking out over the crowds and stuff. And they serve
They're good for crowd control.
Very good purpose. The policeman's high up there. He gets a good picture of what's going on, and then he can actually kind of move the crowd. People are frightened by the horses, but the horses are very good. I mean, they really must be well trained.
They are. Yeah.
So that they don't get frightened and run away, because people set off firecrackers. I mean, there's all kinds of sounds that go on in the course of people demonstrating. So I'm going to read just a little bit of this. When I started out, just as a kind of a lark, so this is actually like a cartoon, a comic book kind of feel to it, and it is the first chapter. And I actually had an illustrator who I asked for him to create as if it was like a comic book. I didn't really want to go into like a graphic novel and actually do the panels and stuff like that. So I just wanted a kind of a little flavor for that. So this is the first chapter of Terrorist War, and I'm just going to read a little bit. And it does take place during the middle of a political demonstration. Pig. Fascist pig, she screams at me in a wailing shrill. Her voice shatters the dull drone of nearby sounds. Hey, pig cops, will they need me in the wee hours as dawn approaches, when 3 thugs follow them to their cars after hours? At that moment, I fend off the intruders. Will they be thankful for the presence of men and women in blue on the streets? Nazi stormtroopers, pigs! I hear the screams of several decibels higher than normal human speech. I am older than some and younger than many here. Their power derives from their sheer numbers, thousands perhaps. Bodies of all types, big and fat with blubber protruding from too tight t-shirts, skinny and pale people who spend all their waking moments indoors, and us, their enemies in blue uniforms. Oink, oink! The woman in front of me threatens me with her childish taunt. Clapping hands and stomping feet encourage her. Wild in the exuberance of youth, she owns nothing yet worth protecting. Then I feel her slimy spit oozing down the side of my face. A wide smirk covers her pale face. The blue-green eyes invite a confrontation. My first impulse is to pulverize her, starting with that smug smile. But I can't do that. I'm a veteran of the NYPD on crowd patrol today. Besides, my European manners don't permit me to wallop a woman not too much older than a teenager. her face erupting with acne, and clearly indifferent to Miss Manner's rules of basic etiquette. So that's just sort of like and that's the whole idea of the opening scene, is there a little crowd making fun, and I have horses on my cover to indicate.
Great.
There's also dogs in here, which is actually part of crowd control. So my books are mysteries with a lot of background story. So my character, Sasha Perloff, is a police detective. He is the son of a Soviet dissident born in Russia, and he is the grandson, and again, this is mine is fiction, of the Battle of Stalingrad, which is this epic 20th century battle that happened in 1942 and 43, which most Americans know virtually nothing about, but then most Americans know virtually no history at all, including their own. So I once saw on a TV, someone was asked when was the Civil War start, they had not a clue. So I kind of meld in all this kinds of stuff. I call it the mix of history, mystery, and current events. So I've written, this will be my third. And the first one, Loose Ends, has as one of its minor characters, Russian President Putin. So I like to mix in some real characters, people actually who exist, and see my character's reaction, people's reaction. I have been to Russia, and I do know from being there that in general, the people in Russia love Putin. And of course our president appears to love him too. But, so I build that in, that even Russians who live in America, could be naturalized citizens like my characters, have a great affection for that kind of, that kind of strongman mentality. Around the world, there are plenty of places where democracy hasn't really caught on. I mean, they may have capitalism, they may be selling products and services around the world, but this idea of democracy just hasn't caught on. And my characters talk about that all the time, that they got the idea about the capitalism, they're really not sure about the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And what I continue to have as a kind of a fun point is my character, Sasha, who's sometimes a little down. He's not always an exuberant person, is always after this elusive thing, he says, the pursuit of happiness, which is a completely American idea. He said nobody else has in their Constitution the pursuit of happiness. Maybe life and liberty, but never the pursuit of happiness. So I make fun with that as a way of kind of showing people, American readers primarily, that around the world, this pursuit of happiness and maybe not even life and liberty, that do they quite get on. So I try to mix a little bit. You do something by mixing in some real good horse sense. So I just kind of put in a little bit of history to offset that.
I like that you mix sort of people and current events in with fictional occurrences. So I think that's great. And I agree with you totally that people in America don't have a real sense of what people in other cultures really believe and feel. And it's always insightful to learn more about that. So I think that's great.
And I have as a pivotal point in terms of history, although not necessarily so much in this terrorist war, it's less about it's less about what's going on in Russia today as much as what are the after effects of having been in the Soviet Union. And there are, and I won't give away the story because I want people to read it, but in terms of terrorism war, we as a country, so President Bush is a character in kind of name only. I actually don't have any characters interrelating with him, but his idea about this war in Iraq and for supposedly because of these weapons that never materialized. But the characters have some affection for that because they think that he was trying to do the right thing. That he may not have done the right thing is something else that other people can kind of answer. But my characters are kind of caught up in trying to be good Americans, but not necessarily really understanding what it's like to be in America. So and I've met a lot of immigrants in my life, and many of them who come here, they love this country, but in many ways, they just still can't quite understand Americans. They think we take too much for granted. like this life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Like, where in the world would, and not necessarily that Americans even do this, but to have some idea that that should be an ideal situation. That seems so
foreign.
Yes, exactly right. Absolutely foreign to them. So I like to play on that, and then also what's mix in a little bit of those histories and things that are going on. So in this one, he's actually going to track what they think is a terrorist, and I introduced some of the things that were introduced by Bush trying to fight terrorism, including things like extraordinary rendition, which was removing people outside of the country where they might have been picked up, like Iraq or Syria, and brought to a foreign country with the premise of actually being able to torture them. And I mean, that Guantanamo Bay, in terms of its existence, not to say that everybody who was put there is actually tortured, but that was part of the mindset about allowing that. So my character sort of pushes against that, because his mother was, in fact, someone who was caught up in the Soviet system, was a dissident, and, in fact, was imprisoned and tortured. So he, in fact, as a character, has this moral compass that says, under no circumstances is that acceptable. And there's a little part in the story where he recaps, again, this is fiction, recaps the actual occurrence where his mother, in one of these things, is dragged away and actually comes back tortured. She used to be a pianist and played with both hands, and they actually destroyed one of her hands so that she would not be able to play the piano. So that's, part of his backstory, which is part of his story. And then there's this whole idea, how can you be good law enforcement and try and protect the country, and at the same time not stumble or even accept certain kinds of things that are really just against our image of being, torture is not American. So that's part of his moral compass. It's a little more complicated than some of the previous ones, but I thought it kind of sparks interest, because 2004, we still have troops in Iraq, and we have lots of troops in Afghanistan.
And it's a complicated world.
It very much is. It very much is. And some of our friends are our enemies are our friends.
And people who were friends before might be enemies now, and vice versa.
Exactly. So it sort of sets the stage for what's kind of crazy going on in this world, and it continues. And I have more in my computer in terms of next books, more to come. They're not quite, how it goes. You start something. I think this happens with writers. You start something, and then you sort of put it down, at least for me. And then I start something else, and maybe I might finish that, and then I look at that, and then I think, oh, maybe I'll create something else. So I actually have this kind of like an outline of 3 more mysteries. So the series continues, and
I know what that's like, because I have the sequel to the Slater Mountain books that I'm working on. I have this book of short stories, anecdotal, nonfiction stories, and then I also have finally getting around to the children's picture book that I've started. And I have the text mostly written, and I've gotten like about 3 or 4 of the illustrations done.
Oh, okay.
But so I've got parts of 3 different projects.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
But you can't work on all 3 at one time.
No.
So it's, you go do a little work on one, then maybe go to another one, and it's hard.
I tried to do that, but it gets too complicated.
Yeah.
So I forget my storyline. So I'm going back to this one, and then there will be perhaps some other ones. The big change I wanted to make in some future ones was to have, again, Sasha as the main character in maybe the next one. But then I wanted to write something from his mother's perspective, since she's very much a major influence and character in all of these books. So instead of having it from his perspective, it might be from her perspective. And that way I could get more into some of the more stickier points in terms of torture and how she feels about being in America. They call in the books America the New Jerusalem. And that actually is from the 1600s, is when colonists came here from England, and they actually referred to America as the New Jerusalem. So I've sort of kept that idea and that wording in the books, and so they're often called, when they come to America or when they're in America, this is the New Jerusalem. And that's how many people feel about coming to this country and what this country represents. That it is this glorious ideal that sometimes needs a little more polishing. We're not quite there yet, but we try to be that beacon. I think it was Reagan had the idea of that beacon on the hill. So that's where I'm going. But you can understand how once you start the brain going, you start coming up with all kinds of ideas, and you have to kind of sort of get more focused.
Right. Pick one to work on to completion, which is difficult because you've got these, all these ideas going at one time. Yeah,
yes, it's floating in your head.
Yes. Not to mention all of the other life things happening at the same time.
Right. So, Judy, I want to thank you for coming to my show. Why don't you show the people again one more time your book?
Okay, and it's been a pleasure to be here. I've really enjoyed being here. One thing you find about horse people is they always love talking about horses.
Oh, good. Okay, that's great.
No matter where you are, you could talk about horses forever.
Yes. And I also want our viewers to know, if I get more information about our literary salon, and also as it approaches with more information about June 16th being Bloomsbury Day here in southeast Connecticut and southern Rhode Island, I'll let you all know as our viewers. If you've got some interesting ideas for where those venues should be, let us know. We're always interested, as I am always interested in promoting local artists. So if you have a good place or a place where we can come and do our readings, I'd love to hear from you. Please just give me you can all call the studio or send me an email at graysonharriet@gmail.com. And of course, I welcome your interest in my newest book. And you can always buy my Sasha Perloff, Anastasia Goodman novels on Amazon. I'm sure yours is available on Amazon.
It is. And I just realized that I forgot to mention that my book won a 2017 Moonbeam Children's Book Award. I'm very proud of that.
Oh, yes.
And so it means it's in the top 10% of the number of books that were submitted for these awards, which there's like 1,500 books submitted for in the various categories. So I'm very, very proud of that. And it's I feel it's a real feather in my cap.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I thank my viewers. And again, if you've got some interesting ideas about venues, or you have some interesting ideas about June 16th, or you'd like to read, you're an author out there, and it doesn't have to be a finished product. It doesn't have to be a book. I'm always looking for particularly poets and writers of nonfiction who would like to share with an audience, because I will find venues and we will have opportunities to do some reading. So this is Harriet Grayson. I am your host and producer of Community Culture Showcase. Thank you very much for joining us, and please pick up a book and read.